Welcome. This is Benedict Hickson and this is the talk on animation. I am going to discuss the history of animation, dealing mainly with the big companies and how they developed animation. Just to make myself clear in this video, I will be making no copy of the different companies' artwork, and as is stated at the bottom of the video throughout, all trademarks we acknowledge to be relative trademarks of their respective owners. The companies I will be talking about are Disney, Fleischer Studios, MGM, and Warner Bros. There are a few animators, by no means all, I will discuss. UB Iwerks, Grim Natwick, Milt Kahl, Ken Harris, Art Babbitt, and Richard Williams, who wrote the great book The Animator's Survival Kit that I highly recommend and has been a great source for this talk. Let me introduce them quickly. UB Iwerks was born in 1901 and died in 1971. He was the chief animator who worked with Walt Disney from the beginning. He is best known for the creation and animation of Mickey Mouse. Myron Natwick's grandfather was from Norway, and he moved across to Wisconsin in the United States of America. Myron was born there in 1890 and died at the age of 100 in 1990. He got the nickname Grim from his anything but grim personality. He started doing cover designs for sheet music before going on to animation. Grim created Betty Boop for Fleischer Studios and also worked for Walt Disney Productions and Richard Williams Studios. There's a great sketch in Richard Williams' book, The Animator's Survival Kit, of Grim extending his arms and saying, "Animation, it's all in the timing and the spacing." Strange that the Americans were the ones to work this out. Milt Kahl was born in 1909 and died in 1987. He is often considered the finest draftsman of Disney animators. For many years, the final look for Disney films were designed by Milt. There is a lovely set of drawings in the Animator's Survival Kit that you must see, depicting Richard asking Milt, while he was bent over his work, if he ever listened to classical music while he was working. Then there was a depiction of Milt losing his temper, getting bigger and bigger as he shouted at Richard, who shrunk down smaller and smaller, and Milt was shouting what a stupid question it was and that he himself wasn't smart enough to think of more than one thing at a time. As this came from such a genius, from that point on, Richard chose to work in silence to help his concentration. Ken Harris was born in 1898 and died in 1982. He first worked for a car dealership in Los Angeles. Ken is best known for his work with Warner Bros. And also for Richard Williams' studio. After 7 or 8 years of working with Ken, he told Richard that he was starting to draw things in the right place. When Richard answered that he was learning a lot from him, he replied that he could be an animator. As Richard had been animating for 18 years and had a successful studio, it came as a bit of a shock, but certainly showed how talented Ken was. Art Babbitt was born in 1907 and died in 1992. Art is best known for his work for the Walt Disney Company, including the creation of Goofy, his work on films like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Fantasia. Although a well-paid top animator, he was sympathetic to the lower echelon Disney artists and became one of the strike leaders on their behalf. This did not please Walt Disney, and yet he was often reinstated after being fired, largely because of his talent that they needed. These animators, Grim, Milt, Ken, and Art, are considered to be part of the Golden Oldies. The Golden Oldies were called that because they were considered to be the great talent that helped some of the big companies make it big and develop so fast in the 20th century. Richard Williams was born in 1933 and is still alive when this presentation was made. After his animation of The Little Island, whilst working as an independent animator, he took on Ken Harris as his consultant. He later took on other animators to assist and advise him, including Grim Natwick, Milt Kahl, and Art Babbitt. Richard Williams is best known for being director of animation for Who Framed Roger Rabbit. This is quite ironic because this was using a lot of squashy, stretchy style of animation from the 1940s that for a long time he was keen to avoid. I shall now introduce some of the companies: Disney, Fleischer Studios, MGM and Warner Bros., covering some of their early films. I will start off with Disney. Disney is best known for Mickey Mouse. It was in 1928 when Mickey Mouse went on a big debut with the film Steamboat Willie. It was worked on with Walt Disney directing and Up Iwerks animating. The main feature about this film was that it had synchronized sound with a post-produced soundtrack. It was the third of Mickey Mouse's films, but the first to be distributed and was very popular. In 1929, The Skeleton Dance came out. The skeleton dance consists of 4 human skeletons dancing and making music around a spooky graveyard, described by some as a modern version of the medieval European danse macabre. The music consisted of the foxtrot in a minor key and Edvard Grieg's The March of the Trolls. It is a celebration of the macabre being happy at the same time. Up Iwerks handled all of the animation and along with Steamboat Willie set the style of Disney. In 1932, Flower Trees was produced. Although it started as black and white, when Disney saw another film in color, the original black and white version was scrapped and it became the first commercially released film produced in full color 3-strip Technicolor. Here you can see the 3 color strips, cyan, yellow and magenta, and how they would combine into the full color. Walt Disney chose Silly Symphonies to use the color on particularly because it was behind the popularity of Mickey Mouse. It demonstrates good personality shown by the flowers, trees and other plants and animals. 3 Little Pigs came out in 1933 and won the Academy Award for the Best Animated Short Film in 1934, and it was so popular it carried on running for months afterwards in the cinemas. It was recognized that this film was the first film to bring about characterization through posture and movement of the 3 pigs, looking alike but very different in character, Pfeiffer and Fiddler Pig being frivolous and carefree, and Practical Pig being cautious and earnest. Snow White is actually a German fairy tale, and the Brothers Grimm published it in the first edition of their collections, Grimm's Fairy Tales, and it was numbered as Tale 53. Animators' first sketches of Snow White's character were similar to Betty Boop and were considered too cartoonish. The supervising animator Hamilton Lusk and his co-animator Les Clark were given the challenge of making Snow White more human and realistic than any of Disney Studios' previous animated characters. It was an experiment in imitating realistic human movement and anatomy to Snow White's animation techniques. The relatively new technique of using live action footage as a reference was used to bring Snow White's character to life. They used the young dancer, Marjorie Celeste Belcher. Lusk directed her through numerous movement sequences that the animators later studied and copied the footage to enhance the realism of Snow White's animated movements. For Snow White's voice, Guido Casalotti auditioned 150 girls but was still not happy. His daughter overheard this and on another phone phoned his father and sang in a tune to demonstrate her voice. Her father asked her to put the phone down, but the casting director heard her voice and liked it and asked her to audition. At the audition she immediately got the part. It came out in 1937. When I was young, I grew up with classical music and as a musician, so when I saw Fantasia, I loved it. It came out originally in 1940. The film consists of 8 animated segments set to pieces of classical music conducted by Leopold Stokowski. Disney settled on the idea of the film when they had almost finished the elaborate short of Silly Symphonies, The Sorcerer's Apprentice. When production costs grew to more than it could earn, he decided to put it into a full-length film. The soundtrack was recorded using multiple sound channels and reproduced with Fantasound, a pioneering sound system, and was the first film with stereophonic sound. At the time it was received with mixed reaction. and didn't make a profit due to World War II starting. Since then, it has become very popular, and in 1998, the American Film Institute ranked it the 5th greatest film in their top 10 list. In 1999, Walt Disney's nephew, Roy E. Disney, co-produced the sequel Fantasia 2000. I shall now move on to some of the early works of Fleischer Studios. Fleischer Studios was founded in New York by brothers Max Fleischer and Dave Fleischer from a Jewish family from the Austrian-Hungarian province of Galicia. They founded it in 1921, and in 1942 Paramount Pictures, its parent company and distributor of its films, forced them to resign. It was, though, Disney's main competition in the early days. Its style is more with human characters that they created, Coco the Clown, Betty Boop, Bimbo, Popeye the Sailor and Superman, than anthropomorphic animals that most other animation companies focused on. Popeye the Sailor shorts came out from 1933 till 1942. All cartoons are one reel of 6 to 10 minutes long, and in black and white till 3 from 1936 till 1939 in Technicolor. In 1939 they came out with Gulliver's Travels. It was Paramount's first feature-length animated film. From 1934 the Fleischer brothers had wanted to make a feature-length film which Paramount had not been keen on, until the success of Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, when they agreed. It was the time when Paramount set up studios for them in Florida, and they moved from their offices in New York. Their production time gave them a third of the time that Snow White took to be made. As a result, their studios were overcrowded with employees. Rotoscoping, an animation technique developed by Fleischer Studios, was used throughout it to animate Gulliver. The process involves tracing live action footage frame by frame. Sam Parker, the voice for Gulliver, also modeled as the character's live action reference. The film was a success. Mr. Bug Goes to Town, also known as Hoppity Goes to Town and Bugville, was released in 1941. It was originally meant to be an adaptation of Maurice Maeterlinck's The Life of a Bee, but as the Fleischers couldn't get the rights, the studio came up with its own story. They had a lot of problems at the time though, as they had moved from New York to Miami, Florida, and expanded their staff a lot. They were deeply in debt. The Fleischers were forced to sell their studio to Paramount halfway through the film in 1941. Paramount kept them in production, but they had to give them unsigned letters of resignation to Paramount to be used at the studio's discretion, as the brothers had not spoken to each other since early in 1940 due to personal and professional disputes. Due to the misfortune of the launch of the film 2 days before the attack on Pearl Harbor, Mr. Bug was a financial disaster. The Fleischer brothers were ousted from the studio they'd created in 1921, and Paramount renamed it Famous Studios. The next company I'm going to discuss is MGM, or Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Studios. After the disaster of a series of MGM cartoons based on Captain and the Kids, the storyman and character designer Joseph Barbera was paired with the director William Hanna. Joseph suggested a cat and mouse feud that he called at first Puss Gets the Boot. Others in MGM complained that it wasn't original to have a cat and mouse short. But it was very successful, and MGM's producer took them off what they were working on and commissioned a series featuring the cat and mouse. Hanna and Barbera ran a contest to come up with the name of the cat and mouse. Tom's physical appearance developed over time. In the early 1940s, Tom had an excess of detail, shaggy fur, numerous facial wrinkles and multiple eyebrow markings, which were later streamlined by 1940 into a format easier to produce. Also, although Tom had a very quadrupedal beginning, with time he became more bipedal. Jerry the mouse remained essentially the same. Droopy, the anthropomorphic dog with a droopy face. was nameless when he first came out in 1943. Then was named Happy Hound before being named in his fifth series, Senor Droopy, in 1949. He was created by Fred Tex Avery. He was an unusual cartoon as he didn't show the brashness or aggressiveness of a lot of the other cartoon characters, but instead a deadpan expression, unique sense of calm whatever happened around him, and a rather sleepy, sad look. Avery's style no longer applied to the rules of logic, gravity, time and space, and felt the funniest humor resulted in having cartoon characters do things that actors couldn't duplicate. The next and last company I'm going to discuss is Warner Brothers, otherwise known as Warner Bros. Or WB. The corporate name honors the four founding Warner Brothers. The Jewish family were originally from a part of Poland that had been subjugated to Russian Empire with the partitions of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. They emigrated to North America, first Ontario, Canada, then they moved to Ohio, United States. Their surname was originally Voskolasa or Wonsel. Their American names were Harry, Albert, Sam and Jack. I'm going to try their Polish names. In 1929, Warner Brothers wanted to develop a series of musical animated shorts to promote their music, as they had acquired the ownership of Brunswick Records and 4 other music publishers. Warner made a deal with Leon Schlesinger to produce Looney Tunes cartoons. He took on Harmon and Isling to produce their first series, which was released in 1930. However, in 1933, over a budget dispute with Schlesinger, Harmon and Isling left with the rights to the characters and cartoons that they had created. Warner took on several new animators, including Tex Avery. In 1935, they developed the characters Porky Pig, Daffy Duck, Porky's Duck, Elmer Fudd, and Bugs Bunny appeared between 1937 and 1940. Merry Melodies was a series of short animated films between 1931 and 1969. It included Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck and Porky Pig. It was produced by the producer Leon Schlesinger. As it already started with a music score, it was easier for the animators in that they had something to work from. Tex Avery created the original version of Daffy Duck. In 1937, animator Bob Clampett redesigned the character, making him taller and lankier and rounding out his feet and his build. The animators made extensive use of the 2 extreme versions of his character, undertaking law enforcement in his own hands and seeking accolades at the expense of everyone else. This brings my talk to a conclusion. In no way have I mentioned all the important animators or companies or animated films, but I hope this will give you an idea of it at least, just a starting point. The next talk we will be examining the process of animation.